Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second part of our first week. I hope that you're navigating around Blackboard, you're getting used to our site a little bit, maybe looking into discussion. I'll talk about discussion at the end of this brief video. So today, what's the topic? We're looking at the purpose of research and why evaluating research matters for all of us, right? Why should we think back to the quote in the first video presentation? Why should we be curious? Why should we poke and prod and think about research in that way? So let's begin. The first thing we need to understand is what is research, and we'll talk about that throughout the course, but I wanted to relay this kind of way of thinking about it to you. Research is an intentional process. It's a way of examining a concept, a question, a phenomenon that you're experiencing professionally or personally, to gain insight through this systematic way of analyzing the question or the concept. And why do we do it? We do it so that we can answer questions. So, for example, why is it that this policy we instituted in our organization that should have helped is not working? Or to solve a problem, we're finding post-COVID, people are having difficulty accessing health insurance or ways to pay for care. You could develop a hypothesis or confirm a question of interest. So I want to test and see what I'm experiencing in my work or my practice. Does that also occur in a larger population? And you want to add knowledge. So we're going to talk about evidence-based. We're talking about literature review, meta review, systematic review, but you want to add your work and your findings in a very linear kind of way to what's going on in your field. If you have something innovative you've learned, something innovative or new that you've tried, you want to test that and then share that with others, so it could be a benefit to people that they're working with. This piece, the second piece, we're going to talk about much more when we get to inferential statistics, where we look at the relationship between variables. So you want to, through formalized research process, you want to see if variables just exist together, right? Do we just coexist? So when this variable is present, A is present, B is present, or we want to make a claim about causality. Does A really cause B, or is there some other variable, C, right, a spurious variable that's really causing all of them? So through the research process, think of experimental design. We want to show that the thing we think is the cause is really the cause, and it's having an effect on the behavior or attitude or outcome that we would like it to. So that's why we use this rigorous process, to make sure we can show through a series of steps that there is not just association, that the two items are not related, but in fact, one will cause another. And we'll cover this more, but it's just to get you thinking about these ideas and why they're so important in the research process. Now, I've heard people say this in a lot of ways, that all researchers have different jargon and different terminology, and it is kind of true. So it's like a dialect of a language, excuse me, that all researchers speak basically the same language. We use the same process, whether we are a researcher that's just beginning in the field and beginning to do research, or somebody who's very experienced and has conducted many research studies over many years. We all kind of understand the same process and use the same basic techniques. And what it does is it allows us to really investigate and then contribute to a larger research collective. So we're going to learn a lot of jargon or research terms throughout the course of this semester, but I want you to know that if you discuss taking a research methods course with us, and you have friends across campus or friends at other institutions or other disciplines, they'll understand the basic rigor or systematic approach of your work as well. So subtle differences like dialectical differences, but we all speak the same research general language. And there are many ways we can do health research. So, and we'll talk about health a lot as well, but according to the World Health Organization, health is not merely the absence of disease, it's having a good quality of physical health, mental health, well-being, right? So health is much broader. And population-based health research takes the health of the individual and spans that out quite a bit too. So if you're studying population-based health, you would look at trends across the population. So what are the, the trends of diseases in a certain population? What is the lifespan? How long do people live in different populations or different groups? I always give the example, falling back on public health, we were very interested in looking at maternal mortality, or infant mortality. So the rates of those two things across different populations. So this is the big picture, right? We're looking at a larger scale, but you don't have to study things at the population-based level. You can study issues in health or healthcare. And again, right, health is not merely absence of disease, it's a good quality of life. So think about it in that context. And that when you study health, right, if you say I'm a health researcher, you could be very, very different people. For example, my office neighbor at school is a nurse. So if I speak to her about health, her understanding of health might vary a little bit than mine with a training in community health education and, with an MPH. So health also varies in scope, and it can be, as you see in the diagram here, it can be clinical research, so laboratory-based research, so studying, changes in cellular processes and those kind of things. But then it does what we call become translational, right? And that you can look at some success or some research that you've done in a laboratory setting, and you can then take that out to a larger population. And I'll give you some examples a bit later in the course, but that's the goal, right? From the bench, from the clinical-based research approach into the population. That's how that scope will change. Oops, sorry about that. These are the 5 steps in a research process. And again, as I talked about earlier, no matter what your discipline, if you are conducting a study, people will look for these 5 elements, right? The first is, did you identify a study question? And people say, how can I do that? There's a process called abduction, which means it's from your experience, right? So, I'll give you an example. I'm working with healthcare providers who work with older adults during COVID, and they were talking a lot about personal challenges, right? Working remotely as a healthcare professional while also, having a personal life and balancing both their clients' needs and their clients' concerns with the concerns of their own, right? And their own physical health, working in a changing world. So the study question we thought of with colleagues and myself was, what's the personal and the professional impact of working in healthcare during COVID for practitioners, right? 2 levels, personal and professional, which were very different, advocating for their clients, but also navigating a new world in their personal life, maybe, having the whole family home, or, working with teams of people that had not worked remotely before. If you don't know how to find a study question, which many people don't, you can brainstorm, right? You can brainstorm, you can do free writing, which we'll do. You can look in the literature. There's so many ways, you can read the literature and say, where's the gap? What's missing and what can I bring to this research that's not been done there? And then you're going to collect a study approach, which is basically, how will you collect the data? So what's your study design? Are you using quantitative, right? More based on numbers, qualitative, more based on describing qualities or aspects, a mixed methods, which is quantitative and qualitative. Are you using an emergent method? Are you taking photos, right? I'm using photo voice, or maybe you're using diaries for people to record events. And that's the approach that you'll bring. And then designing and the study and collecting the data. So what's your study protocol, right? How are you going to engage participants? What are you going to do when you have them? Are you going to interview them, survey them, do a focus group? Are you going to put them in a clinical trial? Are you going to put them in an experimental condition? And then when you get these data, are you going to analyze them with software? What kind of statistical tests or what kind of analyses or analytical methods will you use with your data? And then how will you report it? Often people think the only way to report data is in a journal or conference, and I hear you, but think about it this way. If we're conducting research in the field, this is applied research, we need to get it back to people who could benefit from the research. So are we going to also, maybe do a presentation for the community? Are we going to speak at a professional organization where we can share what we've learned with our peers so they can try to use the same approach with people they're working with, right? So reporting findings is not only in an academic sense, it's to the people we are studying, it's to the community we are doing research in, right? We have responsibilities that way as well. So think about those levels of dissemination, right? Our favorite word. And then why do we do it? Why do we do research, right? Think of the quote. Why do we poke and prod? What's the curiosity? When you read when you view the clips for the discussion this week, you're going to see some pretty out there claims that people make and research that is out there that has not a lot of evidence or not a lot of rigor or good process in it. So the reason we engage in this research process or cycle is to prevent against these kind of wrongdoings, right? We don't want things to be believed that are not evidence-based or tested through some sort of research process. This is like bad science or pseudoscience, right? The idea of snake oil, claims that we can't substantiate that are out there. And then there are claims that are made without testing. And unfortunately, and I'll give you an example, if we don't do this, right, we can't forward thinking. We had a really problematic turn for one of the researchers that looked at brain scans for older persons, or actually anyone who has Alzheimer's disease. And they looked at gaps, right, or places in the brain that were empty. What happened was there's a controversy that now some of the data were altered and some of the scans were shown in a light that favored what the researcher was seeking to find, that this particular protein is related to these brain changes, right? They were kind of over exaggerated, and this is huge, right? So having a way to reproduce what we're testing and what we're studying, having a way to have other people look at it and say, you know what, when I looked at the same information, my scans did not look like that. It gives us a way to counterbalance and make sure the things that we're finding are based on a substantiated process and not just either a desire to publish or a desire to sell a product, or maybe a less rigorous approach. Right, so this is why we have the scientific method, that we all love stories, right? Stories are one of the first things that we are taught. Stories make us feel comfortable. Stories relay information. Storytelling is powerful, but sometimes we may think things that are not always correct, or stories may include elements that don't work. And I'm going to give you a series of either humor-based or blood-based approaches to medicine and health that were believed at one time that we no longer believe in the same way. So traditionally, there was this idea of bloodletting and removing blood from people as a way to cure everything from a headache to fever, to, you name it. And this was used for quite some time, right? That's the photo. And I'm sorry if people are quite squeamish. I grew up with a mother who was a nurse and had many stories about blood, so I don't want to squeamish you out. There was this idea that that experts or people could drain blood or remove blood from a person to balance humors. And humors were fluid in the body that maintain homeostasis or maintain, people's wellness, right? And maintain people being healthy. And that if you were out of sorts, fever, if you, had headache or stomach ache, or if you had some sort of illness, that it meant that one of these humors was out of balance. And the draining of this blood was thought to balance the humors, right? So this was one way of approaching health in a less rigorous scientific way, less rigorous, less scientific way. Leeches were used as well, and we'll talk about leeches a little bit because like Hippocrates and the humors, leeches were used to remove blood, right? And the what do you think process, or what do you think question is there, because we actually do use leeches now, right? So leeches are sometimes used in some experimental work to get blood flow, right? So if there's necrotic, well, not definitely necrotic, but if tissue is lacking blood, right? If they're doing a surgical graft or some sort of procedure, leeches are used, right? So think about this, right? Some things that we use, like humors and leeches, may not meet the scientific standards that we hold today, but aspects of those same approaches are still being explored, but in more experimental or more practice-based applications. And here you see Washington, right? This is an example of bloodletting, right? Bloodletting, this idea of, removing blood to work on humors. So George Washington came down with a sore throat and had difficulty breathing, right? And the approach the physicians had, after many, was to remove blood, right? Repeatedly removing 5 to 7 pints of blood, which didn't help him and probably hastened his demise, right? Or hastened his death. So this was a practice that was thought to be curative, but it was not. So a lot of what I've told you is the process we use to do research, and then some ways that things that don't work, right? Pseudoscience, false claims, snake oil, selling things that don't have scientific basis as cures are happening, right? I always say, if you watch any sort of video, any kind of social media, you're going to be inundated with these claims of things that heal or cure or help, but we don't see the empirical evidence. So do we ever get this right? Let's compare bloodletting to Pasteur or Lister or Koch, right? Their approach to looking at illness was going a little bit beyond humors and saying what exists. And what Pasteur did was look at spoiled food, right, in a very experimental way, and wanted to understand what was going on when food spoiled. And he found out that it was, germ process. And he developed germ theory, and he tested using, experimental data to see, which fruit was kind of decaying, and then what the bacterial levels were. So there's this idea that bacteria are related to disease process rather than other things other than bacteria, right? Bacteria were the causative agent. It was a germ. So why should we care, right? And you might tell me, and I've heard this, a lot, I'm not a researcher. What do I care, right? What does it matter for me? It's not important, right? I'm not going to go and get my master's or my doctorate. I'm not going to be a researcher at the National Institutes of Health or, Centers for Disease Control. Why should I care? Well, this is what I offer to you. That you see in the image, we all wear many hats, right? You may be a student, but you're also a practitioner. You may be a policymaker. You may be, you have a role that might benefit from having research. So if you're designing policy, what evidence is there that this policy will be effective? If you're working with clients, what evidence is it that this intervention or program or course of treatment is going to work, right? Where are you basing it on? Evidence-based practices are those that are tested and published and reviewed for their rigor or their systematic approach. Maybe you'll write grants, right? I used to do a course on grant writing. If you're writing a grant, they want to know the need for the program you're suggesting. It's based in research, right? What do you need to know? Why do you need money for a grant? What's the scope of the problem? What's the scope of the issue? You're grounding it in research. And then, if you want to explore something new, right? I want to try this new exercise intervention, but I'm not sure which one. What does the research say? Who's the population you're studying? You're studying, college students. Are you studying people in their 50s? Are you working with children? What do they say works with that specific group of individuals? And if you apply that research to your practice, will it improve the outcomes that you see? Literacy. Again, think back to jargon, right? When we communicate as health professionals, there's a shared language. So I could say, what was your sample size? Or, what test did you use to do this? Was there an odds ratio? What's your hypotheses? Or what did you find? What's the level of significance of your findings? We can talk that talk. More deeply, when you read an article, you can be that critical observer and say, right, I don't think they did this test right. They use this test, but it doesn't make sense. They're saying that this intervention helps the entire population, but they tested it on, 10 people in one specific community, right? It makes us a little more critical observer. So you can converse with others using the lingo or the jargon, but you also can read other people's work and see if they're addressing this kind of standardized process. When you know what's out there, you will be on the cutting edge, right? You want to know in your field, what is the latest approach? What is the latest design? What is the latest trend that other practitioners are using, so you can benefit that to the people you're working with? It helps us as well. When I looked at that study and thought, wow, they've kind of shaded their scans a little bit for Alzheimer's disease. You step back and it makes you think and say, so I'm working with people and I'm thinking about brain changes, but there's a problem with the way this was reported. So it makes us aware as consumers and in the information that we share with other people. And then this is what we're going to really focus on in discussion 1. It helps us recognize poor or falsified research, right? Again, this one product will solve every issue, right? From, I worked with HIV for a number of years when HIV was first in the field, when it first came out, and it was labeled, and we had human, immunodeficiency virus. And people had all sorts of claims about what treatments worked or what claims or what you could do to cure this disease, right? And you have to have that analytical edge and say, okay, people I worked with were really wanting to be cured, right? They wanted to be well. But at the same time, you have to wear the researcher's hat and say, is this too good to be true? What is the evidence of this? What is going on with this product or this advice? And I've seen that quite a bit, right? You see it all the time. As I said, social media, any kind of YouTube, any kind of thing that you're watching, right? You will be inundated. You will get a lot of claims. This product is the best, and this and that. but we don't know the research behind it. So look for the studies, right? See what studies they cite. And I'm going to leave you with hopefully leading into a really interesting discussion. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you all think about this one. There's 4 videos that you're going to see in this week's module, which you might have looked at already. And then there are 3 questions in discussion. You pick one question, you work on that, and then you respond to other students. So you need to be in discussion at first by Thursday, by midnight on Thursday, and then you wrap up your discussion work by Saturday at right before midnight. So the first video is a TED Talk about why we believe stories, like what is the power of a story and why are they so tempting for us to believe. The second clip is Sweeney Todd, which is a musical, and it's all about like selling a fake product. If you've ever seen an infomercial, I'm going to sell you a fake product, that's what that is. And then you're going to see a parody, 2 humorous clips. One is a parody about like a snake oil or selling a product that does not work. And then the last video clip is using humor to expose these false claims, right? Look them over, take some time, join your colleagues in discussion, get an initial post in by Thursday right before midnight, 11:59, and then wrap up your posts by Saturday, 11:59, right before midnight. And I'll pop in a discussion and I'll give you some announcements. So I hope to see you all next week. Reach out with questions if you have them. If not, jump in discussion and please read the announcements. And I will see you in week 2.